So you mentioned two terms there, community property and equitable distribution. Can you clarify the difference between those two things?
I wish I could. I mean, community property is what California is, and I think there's only like 9 states that are community property, and they're mostly um, Western states. I think it kind of came about by people in covered wagons coming out together, and I think that the idea was we're going out west, and we're gonna have our fortunes together, and everything's gonna be divided equally. Whereas in some of the older Eastern states, it was family money passed down, whatever. And that's the majority of the states in the US, are equitable distribution, which I am told by my colleagues who practice in equitable distribution states that it is a lot very similar to community property these days, which is it's not so much based on what you did or what you have or whatever. It really is pretty much equal when you've gotten married and how you divide things. But it is not just 50-50 down the line in those states. And in those states, I've actually had colleagues say, it may sound like it's no fault, but when we go in and start arguing about what he or she should be entitled to, we're still talking about things like infidelity or hiding money or whatever else, because then it ain't so equitable to be dividing things in half.
So as I understand the math for community property, it's what person A and person B respectively brought into the relationship, and then everything that was earned there from that point forward is divided in half, and supposedly those things. But things get messy. You don't just keep. Not everybody keeps separate bank accounts for as long as they've been married. How do you decide what's his and what's hers, or what's his and his, or hers and hers?
Well, again, a lot of the people we represent, they have business managers. So, you should be keeping what is separate, what you bring into the marriage kind of earmarked. Okay. Let's say you own a home when you get married. If that home is your separate property, you may make improvements to it or whatever. Yes, that is called commingling. But for the most part, and we have a code section where you can trace back and figure out what gets pulled out that is separate property. But for the most part, anything that you brought into the marriage, your futon that you had in your fraternity, at college, that's your separate property. All your,
She made me throw it out though.
because she knew. She knew one day you could be taking that futon and starting over. She wanted to make sure there was no chance. But like,
Ah,
remember when Harry met Sally, the wagon wheel coffee table?
wagon wheel. Yeah.
That was separate property. But like all of your trophies and everything, anything you
Right.
bring into the marriage. Also, anything that you are gifted or inherit during the marriage. So inheritance is kind of easy. Whoever dies leaves you this money. It's separate property. Gifts are interesting. My dad is and what has been a family law practitioner for years, and whenever he goes to somebody's wedding, he only writes a check to the person whose kid it is that he is. I mean, and then I'm
That's
like, but it's a
great.
wedding present, Dad. He's like, no, I want they're separate property. But you have a lot of people in Hollywood that somebody gives you, or in the music industry, somebody gives
Sure.
you a car. That's a gift, and you want to make sure that that gift is separate as opposed to being given to the couple as a community property gift.
So the term equitable is a synonym for a word that I'm guessing you hear a lot. And how many times a month do you hear, but Laura, it's not
Not
fair?
fair. And I said, no, where does it say that it's fair? Does it say that on my business card? It's not fair. None of this is fair. Let's not say fair or equitable. Let's talk about what makes sense. Let's use the word
Mm.
reasonable. What's reasonable? And yeah, it's really not fair. I mean, I have a ton of parents, not so much married people, but people that have kids together that are paying outrageous amounts for a child. And how much of that actually is going to support the child versus the person who they had the child with? Not fair, that's for sure. I mean, manicures, hair, extensions, bags, none of
Hmm.
that's for the child. You got a roof over your head, you got Pampers or Huggies, formula, and maybe a good car seat for the child. That's what the child needs.
18 years, 18
In
years.
New York, it's 21. Even
Wow.
worse. Yeah.
That's the well, we don't quote a lot of Kanye's recent stuff, but the 18 years thing is it resonates, right?
It does.
All
And by
right.
the way, it's not just what you earn during the period. Keep that in mind too. If you write a script or a song or you paint a painting during your marriage, that's community property as well. So it's what you create during that time period.
So if I have a script or if I write a book that it sells whatever it sells within the period of our marriage, and then 10 years later somebody options it and makes a film out of it, my wife gets half of that whatever
Not
I get from.
necessarily the whole half, because my guess is you would probably be helping with some rewrites. Maybe you adapt it. So any post separation or post dissolution services you perform, you would get some credit for that. So it may not be 50-50 down the line, but that's why, I mean, and that happens a lot in Hollywood when you have people,
Mm,
maybe they do a show and then there's a sequel for the show or a spin-off
right.
of the show. So we have to include that. Any incarnation. Years ago, we represented one of the guys that created the Saw franchise, the movies. Now there's a Saw roller coaster at some theme park, and he gets a
Right.
piece of that action. No one thought of that. I mean, we've thought of a lot of things in terms of books on tape and different streaming,
Hmm.
but no one thought of a roller coaster. So now I got to have that in my judgments too. If there's ever a roller coaster,
Yeah. Wow. Funny. I interviewed the author of The House of Gucci, which was a book 20 years before it was a movie.
yeah,
And, the book had come and gone. It was basically just sitting there until it got picked up out of the blue. And she was like, yeah, you can make a movie out of that.
yeah, yeah.
But who knows if she was married or divorced when that was happening? And I mean, it's not wasn't foreseeable anyway at the time.
Right.